Pinellas County, Florida, September 8, 1924. 7 in the morning, already 90 degrees. Marcus Webb was 44 years old and had been laying sewer pipe for the city of Clearwater since the boom started. He was a lean and sun-baked man with the particular economy of movement that long work in Florida heat produces. No gesture wasted, no step taken that wasn't load-bearing. And he had been supervising the crew on the Jefferson Avenue mainline extension for 3 weeks without incident. He knew the Clearwater ground the way a man knows ground he has dug through repeatedly. The sand gave way at a consistent depth to a clay layer that held pipe grade well, and below the clay there was limestone that the jackhammers could break, but that always announced itself first by the change in drill resistance. He had pulled up his share of artifacts in 3 years of sewer work in Clearwater. Broken pottery from the Safety Harbor culture, the occasional worked bone, once a copper ornament whose provenance the city's consulting archaeologist had dated to approximately 1200 AD and declared unremarkable. Marcus Webb understood that the ground here contained things. He did not expect the things it contained on the morning of September 8th. The crew was opening a lateral trench at the junction of Jefferson and Garden Avenues when the excavator operator, a 26-year-old named Paul Kimber, stopped the machine and called Webb over. Kimber had been digging in Florida soil for 4 years, and he knew the difference between the machine hitting something that belonged in the ground and the machine hitting something that did not. What the bucket had struck at approximately 5 feet depth was a stone. Not the limestone shelf that the ground typically threw up in this section, but an individual work stone, squared on visible faces, of a size and regularity that the natural geology of Pinellas County did not produce. Webb had Kimber pull the bucket back and went in by hand. He was in the trench for 20 minutes before he climbed out and told Kimber to shut the machine down. But here is what the Florida State Bureau of Geology has spent 100 years making sure you never ask about. The City of Clearwater's sewer expansion project of 1924 was the largest municipal infrastructure program in Pinellas County's history to that date, driven by the population growth of the Florida land boom that had brought thousands of new residents to the Gulf Coast in the preceding 3 years. The project was federally assisted under the Public Roads Administration's Sanitation Improvement Program, which meant that federal oversight accompanied the funding. A field inspector from the program's regional office in Atlanta reviewed site progress on a bi-weekly basis. The project was on a schedule that city management had communicated, in writing, as inviolable. No construction stoppage was acceptable without documented cause. Marcus Webb had been told this directly. He stopped the machine anyway because what he had found in the Jefferson and Garden Trench required him to stop it, regardless of any schedule. What Webb uncovered over the following 3 hours, with Kimber's help and without further mechanical excavation, was a burial site of a scale inconsistent with anything the Clearwater archaeological record had previously produced. The site extended approximately 30 feet along the trench line and approximately 12 feet beyond the trench walls in both lateral directions. Dimensions Webb established by probing with a steel rod before any additional hand excavation. Within the accessible area of the site, Webb and Kimber uncovered 19 complete skeletal individuals in a single burial layer at 5 feet depth, each oriented with the skull to the northwest, each positioned with the arms along the body in a way that Webb described in his written report to the city engineer as placed with intention, not fallen into position. 19 individuals. All 19 had the same anomaly. The skulls had 2 rows of teeth. Webb noticed it on the first skull he cleared fully, not immediately, because the first observation was the size of the skull, which was larger than what he associated with a standard human adult, and the size absorbed his attention before the teeth did. But when he looked at the teeth, he saw that the upper and lower jaws each carried 2 complete rows of dentition. A front row of fully developed teeth in the standard human position, and a second row immediately behind it, also fully developed, also complete, positioned as though the jaw architecture had been designed for 2 rows rather than 1. He cleared 3 more skulls in the following hour. All 3 had the same configuration. He sent Kimber to the city engineer's office with a verbal report. He stayed in the trench with the site until the city engineer's representative arrived. The state response was rapid in a way that Marcus Webb had not expected. The City of Clearwater's standard protocol for unexpected archaeological finds during infrastructure work was to notify the Florida State Bureau of Geology, which would send a field examiner within 5 to 10 business days. The Bureau's field examiner, a man named Raymond Hollis, arrived at the Jefferson and Garden site on September 9th, the following morning. Raymond Hollis was 51 years old, a physical geologist who had worked for the Florida state government since 1901 and whose professional experience included the documentation of Safety Harbor and Weeden Island culture sites across the Gulf Coast region. He spent 2 days at the site. He had a full set of skeletal measurements taken. He photographed every skull. He wrote a field report that he submitted to the Bureau's Tallahassee office on September 12th. The field report is not in the Florida State Bureau of Geology's Public Records series. A review of the Bureau's Geological Survey records for 1924, held at the Florida State Archives in Tallahassee under the designation Survey Reports, Volume 31, does not include Raymond Hollis's September 1924 site report. The Bureau's correspondence files for September 1924 include a memorandum from the Bureau Director to an unnamed correspondent in Washington, dated September 15th, noting that the Pinellas County material has been assessed and will be forwarded under sealed cover per the arrangement discussed. The unnamed correspondent's identity and the institution referenced as the arrangement recipient are not specified in the memorandum. Raymond Hollis's subsequent career at the Florida Bureau of Geology shows a gap in his field assignment records between September 1924 and January 1925. 4 months during which no field assignments appear in his name in the Bureau's operational records. The Bureau of American Ethnology's administrative records for September 1924, held in the Federal Archives under the Bureau's operational series, contain a travel authorization for a field operative to Pinellas County, Florida, dated September 11, 1924. The operative's name is not legible in the copy provided under the Freedom of Information request filed in March 2018 by the researcher Thomas Alcott, who requested all Bureau of American Ethnology records related to Pinellas County, Florida for the period 1920 through 1930. Of the 6 documents provided in response, 5 related to general regional surveys. The 6th was the September 11th travel authorization with the operative's name obscured. No accession record for any skeletal material from Pinellas County, Florida for September 1924 or any adjacent period appears in any accessible institutional catalog. The double dentition documented by Marcus Webb at the Jefferson and Garden site is not a pathological anomaly known in the clinical literature of 1924 or subsequently as a population characteristic. Hyperdontia, the presence of supernumerary teeth, is a documented individual condition occurring at low frequency in anatomically modern human populations. It does not produce a systematic second row of fully formed dentition in the standard jaw positions. The condition Webb described, upper and lower jaws each carrying 2 complete rows of fully developed teeth in anatomically organized positions, is not described in the medical literature as a known pathological presentation. It is described as a skeletal characteristic in the accounts of anomalous North American burial sites across the 19th and early 20th century. At mound excavations in Ohio, in Virginia, in West Virginia, at grave sites in Tennessee and Georgia, consistently described by the documenting professional in terms that indicate the double row is structural rather than pathological, organized, bilateral, consistent across multiple individuals from a single population. Raymond Hollis's field report, which documented this characteristic in 19 individuals from a single burial layer, would have been the most systematic documentation of the double-row dentition pattern in the Southeast American record. The report is not accessible. The global parallel that fits the double dentition characteristic in the context of skeletal populations with anomalous cranial dimensions is not from the standard human evolutionary record. It appears in the descriptions of Gigantopithecus blacki, the largest known primate in the fossil record, whose dental morphology included broad molar rows of unusual organization. The Gigantopithecus parallel is not a cultural argument. It is a morphological argument. The double dentition pattern in the Clearwater site skulls, combined with the above standard cranial dimensions that Webb noted on first observation, produces a skeletal profile that occupies a morphological space between anatomically modern humans and the upper range of primate dental organization. This is not a claim about species, it is a claim about physical characteristics. The physical characteristics are documented in Webb's written report and in Raymond Hollis's field photographs, which remain in the sealed accession of whatever federal institution received the September 1924 material. The Jefferson and Garden construction site was backfilled on September 13, 1924, by a city crew working under orders from the city engineer's office. The sewer line was rerouted around the site by a distance of approximately 20 feet to the east, avoiding the full extent of the burial layer. The rerouting required an additional 3 days of work and added measurable cost to a project that city management had declared schedule inviolable. The city engineer's authorization for the rerouting, on file at the Clearwater City Hall archives under the designation Sewer Project Records, Volume 4, cites the reason for the deviation as subsurface obstruction, geological origin. The obstruction was not geological. It was 19 complete human skeletal individuals with double-row dentition at 5 feet depth, placed by people whose physical characteristics are not represented in any accessible scientific collection. The land at the intersection of Jefferson and Garden Avenues in Clearwater, Florida, is today a standard municipal intersection in a residential neighborhood. The sewer line runs 20 feet east of its original intended route. The burial layer, at 5 feet depth, extends beyond the rerouted trench line in all lateral directions. The extent of the site that was not excavated, the portions beyond the trench walls that Webb probed with a steel rod and found continuous, remains at 5 feet depth below the surface. The intersection has no historical marker, no designation, no record in the Clearwater Historic Preservation Office's database that acknowledges what was found there in September 1924. Marcus Webb's written report to the city engineer is in the Clearwater City Hall archives. Raymond Hollis's field report is not accessible through any disclosed process. The 19 skulls with the double rows of teeth are in the institutional custody of a federal body whose travel records acknowledge sending a representative to Pinellas County in September 1924, and whose accession records acknowledge receiving nothing. Marcus Webb was 44 years old when Paul Kimber called him over to the trench. He stayed in the ground with what he found until the state sent someone to take it from him. He filed his report. He completed the project. He rerouted the pipe. He did what a foreman does when the ground produces something that stops the work. And what the ground produced in September 1924 at Jefferson and Garden Avenues is still at 5 feet depth in the Clearwater soil, in the portions of the site that no trench has reached since, in the same still layer where Marcus Webb's hands first found it, carrying the double rows of teeth that the accessible record has not acknowledged since September 12, 1924, when Raymond Hollis sealed his field report and sent it north. The Clearwater find does not stand alone in the Florida archaeological record of the early 20th century. A dredging operation in Tampa Bay in 1918, documented in a brief report by the Army Corps of Engineers under the designation Tampa Harbor Improvement Survey, encountered what the Corps engineer described as organized stone construction at 30 feet below the bay floor, of a kind inconsistent with the natural geology of the area. The report noted the find, recommended further investigation, and was filed in the Corps archive where it remained without any subsequent investigation being conducted. A phosphate mining operation in Polk County in 1921 recovered from a stratum the company's geologist identified as pre-Columbian, a series of large bones whose dimensions the company's physician brought in to assess whether they were human, described in a letter to the company president as consistent with a human being of a stature I have not previously encountered in any clinical or archaeological context. The company's president's response to the physician's letter does not survive in any accessible archive. The bones were not submitted to any state or federal institution. Their current location is unknown. 3 Florida sites, 3 separate professionals, 3 separate years, 1918, 1921, and 1924, each producing physical evidence inconsistent with the standard archaeological framework for pre-Columbian Florida, each producing a state or federal response that resulted in the physical evidence becoming inaccessible. The pattern is not confined to Florida. It is the same pattern documented in Pennsylvania in 1879, in Missouri in 1891, in Wyoming in 1932. The institutional response is consistent across geography and decade. The evidence appears, a credentialed professional documents it, a federal representative arrives, the evidence enters institutional custody, the accession record does not follow. What differs between the cases is the professional who did the documenting and the state whose soil produced the find. What does not differ is the federal representative's arrival time, the absence of an accession record, and the sealed status of whatever physical material the representative carried out. The Safety Harbor culture, which is the pre-Columbian population most thoroughly documented in the Pinellas County archaeological record, was active in the region from approximately 900 AD through the period of Spanish contact in the 16th century. Its burial practices are documented through dozens of excavated sites across the Gulf Coast. Burial mounds containing flexed skeletal individuals, associated ceramic material, and occasional copper ornaments. Safety Harbor skeletal remains, as documented across the archaeological literature, show dentition within the standard human range. None of the documented Safety Harbor sites in Pinellas County contains individuals with the double-row dentition that Marcus Webb documented at Jefferson and Garden Avenues. The Clearwater burial layer, dated by its depth and by the absence of any European material in the associated layer to the pre-contact period, produced 19 individuals with a skeletal characteristic that is not represented in the Safety Harbor record or in any other documented Florida archaeological population. What Raymond Hollis's field report contained, beyond the photographs and measurements that Marcus Webb observed being taken during the 2 days of site assessment, whether Hollis identified the population, proposed a cultural affiliation, or drew any conclusions about the double-row dentition, is not known, because the report is not accessible and the person who wrote it is not alive. Raymond Hollis retired from the Florida Bureau of Geology in 1931 and died in Tallahassee in 1938. His obituary in the Tallahassee Democrat describes a career in service of Florida's geological understanding and mentions no specific finds. His personal papers, if any, were not donated to any archive. The gap in his field assignment records between September 1924 and January 1925, 4 months, spans the period immediately following the Jefferson and Garden site assessment. A gap in the field assignment records of a state geologist at a period that coincides exactly with a significant anomalous find that he personally assessed is not a filing error. Field assignment records are administrative documents maintained on a continuous basis. A 4-month gap in a continuous administrative record is a 4-month interval during which the person's activities were not being recorded in the standard administrative system. What Raymond Hollis was doing between September 1924 and January 1925, for whom and in connection with what physical material, is not documented in any record that has been located. The Bureau's memorandum of September 15th notes that the Pinellas County material would be forwarded, under sealed cover per the arrangement discussed. The arrangement is not documented. The sealed cover arrived somewhere. The material it contained has been there since September 1924, in the double-row configuration that Marcus Webb first noticed at 5 feet depth in the trench at Jefferson and Garden Avenues, in the Clearwater soil that gave it up for 2 days, and then received it back as concrete and asphalt and the standard geography of a municipal intersection that carries no memory of what is beneath it. The Jefferson and Garden intersection sits in what is today a residential neighborhood in central Clearwater. The intersection is maintained by the City of Clearwater Public Works Department. The sewer line runs 20 feet east of its intended route. A gate-mounted camera covers the service access to the lift station, installed in 1987 at the northwest corner of the intersection. Its housing showing the weathering of a decade of Gulf Coast salt air on a structure that was installed before the most recent housing development on the adjacent parcels. The Pinellas County Property Appraiser's Office lists the parcels surrounding the intersection as residential, with no commercial designation, no historical overlay, and no archaeological sensitivity notation. The Florida Division of Historical Resources maintains a database of archaeological sites in Pinellas County. The Jefferson and Garden intersection does not appear in the database. The burial layer that extends beyond the 1924 trench lines in both lateral directions is at 5 feet depth below the surface of those parcels, in the same configuration Marcus Webb mapped with his steel probe on the morning of September 8th. The 19 individuals he uncovered are gone, taken by the sealed cover arrangement of September 15th. The individuals beyond the trench walls, the ones the probe found but no hand reached, may still be there, at 5 feet, in the same layer, with the same double rows of teeth, in the Clearwater soil that has held them since before the Safety Harbor culture, before the Weeden Island culture, before anyone whose name appears in the official archaeological record of Pinellas County was alive to leave a record. Marcus Webb spent 2 days with them. Raymond Hollis spent 2 days with them. The arrangement took them north. The ground held the rest. The sewer line carries Clearwater's waste from the residential streets above it. The burial layer is 2 feet below the sewer pipe. The gap between the pipe and the layer is the distance of 2 standard house bricks. The people who built the pipe do not know what is below it. The people who live above the pipe do not know what is below it. Marcus Webb knew. Raymond Hollis knew. The correspondent who received the sealed cover in September 1924 knew. None of them is alive to say what they knew. The double rows of teeth are in the ground or in the dark of a federal storage facility, and either way, they have been waiting since before any record of the civilization that produced them was kept. And the intersection of Jefferson and Garden carries no sign that anything below it was ever anything other than Pinellas County clay. The formal record of what Raymond Hollis documented at the Jefferson and Garden site consists of the Bureau of Geology's September 15th memorandum noting that the material would be forwarded under sealed cover, the city engineer's rerouting authorization citing a geological obstruction, Marcus Webb's 2-page incident report to the city, and the Army Corps Field Inspector's bi-weekly visit report for September 1924, which noted a 2-day work stoppage at the Jefferson and Garden Trench and gave the reason as subsurface finds under state review. These 4 documents are the total above-ground institutional record of 19 skeletal individuals with double-row dentition, found at 5 feet depth in Pinellas County in September 1924. The state report that would have connected these 4 documents and explained what was in the sealed cover is not accessible. Raymond Hollis wrote it. It went somewhere. Marcus Webb was 44 years old, and he spent 2 days in a trench in 90-degree Florida heat with something that stopped his work and earned a 4-month gap in the state geologist's field records and a federal travel authorization within 3 days of its discovery. He filed his report. He rerouted the pipe. He finished the project. He was a foreman. That was what he did. The ground below the intersection of Jefferson and Garden Avenues has held what he left behind, what the probe found in the lateral sections beyond the trench walls, since the morning he put his rod into the soil and found the layer continuous in every direction, carrying the double rows of teeth in the cool quiet of 5 feet of Pinellas County earth. The Florida land boom of the early 1920s is the economic context that made the Jefferson and Garden discovery both inevitable and suppressible. Clearwater's population tripled between 1920 and 1925. The sewer expansion project that Marcus Webb was supervising in September 1924 was driven by that growth and funded by the expectation of more. Land in Pinellas County was selling at prices that would have been inconceivable a decade earlier. A finding of significant pre-Columbian archaeological material at a major infrastructure corridor. Material that would require assessment, halt construction, potentially trigger protective designation, was incompatible with the economic momentum that every investor, developer, and municipal official in Clearwater was riding. The city of Clearwater rerouted the pipe 20 feet to the east and called the obstruction geological. The Florida state government accepted the memorandum routing and sent it north under sealed cover. The federal institution that received the sealed cover has no record of receiving it. The land boom continued. The 3 years following September 1924 produced the peak of the Florida boom and then the bust of 1926, when the market collapsed and the population growth stopped. What remained after the bust was a county with a rerouted sewer pipe and a burial layer at 5 feet depth that nobody who made the rerouting decision was still financially interested in protecting. But the institutional decision had been made. The sealed cover had gone north. The state report had been made inaccessible. The burial layer had been backfilled. And the decision, once made, does not unmake itself because the economic incentive that produced it has expired. The layer is still at 5 feet. The sealed cover is still wherever it went in September 1924. The intersection is still at Jefferson and Garden. The city's archaeological database still carries no entry for it. Marcus Webb filed his report. The city filed its rerouting authorization. The Bureau filed its September 15th memorandum. The record ends there. The double-row dentition that Marcus Webb documented in the Clearwater burial layer is the specific physical characteristic that connects this site to the broader pattern of anomalous skeletal finds in the American archaeological record across the 19th and early 20th centuries. The Sayre, Pennsylvania case of 1880 produced 3 skulls with structural bony projections above the orbital rims, a different cranial anomaly, but one that equally falls outside the standard clinical literature's range of pathological variation. The Grave Creek Mound case of 1838 produced skulls whose cranial volume exceeded the standard human maximum. The Lovelock Cave case of 1924 produced individuals whose estimated standing heights placed them outside the standard human skeletal range. The Clearwater case produced individuals with 2 complete rows of dentition in the standard jaw positions. 4 sites, 4 decades, 4 different states. 4 different anomalous cranial or dental characteristics, each documented by a credentialed or competent professional, each removed from accessible institutional records by federal contact within days or weeks of discovery. The pattern is not the anomaly itself. No 2 sites share the same physical characteristic. The pattern is the institutional response to the anomaly, which is consistent across the 4 sites and across the full span of the documented record. Marcus Webb was 44 years old when he stopped the machine and climbed into the trench. He did what any responsible supervisor would do. He documented what he found and reported it and waited for the institution to respond. The institution responded in 6 days. The material left in a sealed cover. The burial layer is still at 5 feet depth. The double rows are still in whatever collection received them. The intersection of Jefferson and Garden Avenues carries no memory of September 1924.